It all started with a knock at my door, but not just any knock. It was loud, authoritative, and insistent, the kind that sent an immediate warning to my gut that something wasn't right. It was early morning, too early for visitors, and the sheer force behind the pounding told me that whoever was outside wasn't planning to take no for an answer. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my property was gated, so whoever was out there had gone out of their way to get to my doorstep. I took a deep breath and opened the door, only to be met with a sight so ridiculous that, for a split second, I thought I was being pranked. Standing in front of me were 5 men in tactical gear, dressed in black uniforms that read, police, across their chests and backs, hands resting on their belts like they were about to conduct a full-blown raid. I felt my stomach drop. These weren't actual police officers. These were a bunch of HOA goons playing dress-up. The man in the front, a burly guy in sunglasses with a shaved head, arms like tree trunks, and the unmistakable air of someone who thought he was way more important than he actually was, cleared his throat. "You need to step outside, sir," he said in a tone that was more command than request. I blinked at him. "Who the hell are you?" The smirk he gave me made my blood boil. He pulled out a clipboard, flipping through a stack of papers before shoving it toward me. "We're with the HOA Enforcement Division. You've been cited for multiple violations, failure to comply with HOA regulations, and obstruction of an official investigation." I stared at him for a solid 5 seconds, then let out a laugh. A loud, genuine laugh. "You're kidding, right? I'm not even in your damn—" The smirk vanished instantly. The bald thug stiffened, jaw clenching. "According to our records, your property falls within the jurisdiction of the neighborhood named by—" I rolled my eyes and took the ridiculous packet of citations he had thrust at me. My eyes scanned the list of accusations: unauthorized fencing, landscaping violations, failure to adhere to approved exterior paint colors, obstruction of HOA patrol routes, and my personal favorite, refusal to pay outstanding HOA fees. I looked back up at the so-called officer, shaking my head. None of this applies to me. My property is privately owned and outside of your HOA's jurisdiction. You have no legal claim over me, my home, or my land. One of the other HOA enforcers, a wiry-looking guy with a mustache that screamed, "I take myself way too seriously," stepped forward, arms crossed. "Failure to comply with an HOA enforcement officer is a serious offense, sir." I actually snorted. "You're not cops. You don't get to enforce anything on me. We have the authority to issue fines, liens, and legal action against non-compliant homeowners." I took a step forward, my own posture mirroring theirs. "Not when the homeowner isn't even in the HOA." The bald one's face darkened. He glanced at his clipboard, then back at me. "You have 24 hours to correct the violations listed." I narrowed my eyes. "And if I don't?" His smirk returned. "Then we'll escalate." That was it. That was all I needed to hear. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 right in front of them. "Yeah, I need real law enforcement at my address." I made sure to speak loudly enough that the entire group could hear. "There's a group of men impersonating officers, trespassing on private property, and attempting to intimidate me with fraudulent claims." Their entire demeanor shifted. The second they heard impersonating officers and law enforcement, they tensed. Baldy's smile faltered, and the mustache guy shifted uncomfortably. One of the others, a younger-looking guy who had clearly realized they were in over their heads, whispered something to Baldy. The leader sneered. "This isn't over. We'll be back, and next time we won't be so nice." With that, they stormed off, piling into marked OA enforcement vehicles, cars that looked eerily similar to police cruisers, complete with sirens and light bars. I watched them speed away, shaking my head. These people are out of their damn minds. I didn't know it yet, but that was only the beginning. Because exactly 1 week later, they came back, this time with a warrant. I should have known they weren't going to let it go. Bullies don't walk away after being embarrassed. They double down. And the HOA police were nothing if not a bunch of bullies on a power trip. It started a week after their first visit. I was just getting comfortable after a long day when my security cameras pinged an alert to my phone, motion detected at my front gate. I pulled up the footage. expecting maybe a delivery truck or a wandering deer. Instead, I saw them. 3 HOA vehicles, black SUVs marked HOA enforcement, parked right outside my property. A dozen men in tactical vests stood in my driveway, their hands resting on their utility belts like they thought they were real cops. My stomach churned. They were back, and this time they weren't just knocking. I rushed to my front door, stepping out before they could start their usual intimidation routine. The same bald leader from last time stepped forward, a smug expression plastered on his face, a folder in his hands. "Mr. My last name," he called out, his voice dripping with fake authority. "You're in violation of multiple HOA ordinances, and we have an official enforcement order requiring your compliance." I folded my arms, scanning the group. They had more people this time, and unlike last time, they looked like they meant business. "Like I told you last week, I'm not in your HOA. You have no jurisdiction over me." Baldy smirked. "Then why don't you take a look at this?" He handed me a stack of papers. It was a warrant for an HOA compliance inspection, signed by someone who wasn't a judge, but rather the HOA's so-called chief of community oversight. I couldn't help but laugh. "You actually expect me to take this seriously?" I flipped through the pages, pointing out the nonsense in real time. "This isn't a real warrant. This is just a piece of paper signed by one of your own board members." Mustache guy stepped forward, his arms crossed aggressively. "We have the right to enter your property and conduct a compliance check. Failure to comply will result in fines, legal action, and potential eviction." That word, eviction. I stared at him for a moment, processing just how delusional they were. "You think you can evict me? From my own house? A house I own outright?" Baldy's smirk widened. "If you don't cooperate, we will be forced to escalate." "Escalate? You're already trespassing. What's next? You going to arrest me? Drag me out of my own home?" His silence was loud, and that's when I realized that's exactly what they were planning to do. The second I handed the fake warrant back to him, he nodded to his men. 2 of them stepped forward, reaching for the zip ties on their belts. I backed up immediately, raising my hands. "You touch me, and I'll press charges for assault and unlawful detainment." Baldy tilted his head. "You're refusing to comply with a lawful order. That order isn't lawful, and you know it." He sighed theatrically. "Have it your way." Then he did something I wasn't expecting. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Yeah, we're at my address. He's being uncooperative. Send them in." I felt my stomach tighten. "Send who in?" That's when I heard the sound of tires screeching down my street. From the corner of my property, 2 more black SUVs appeared, followed by an actual police car. My stomach dropped. Not because I was scared of the cops, but because I knew exactly what the HOA was doing. They had actually called the real police and framed the situation as if I was the one breaking the law. I could already hear the conversation in my head. "We have an aggressive, non-compliant homeowner resisting an inspection order. He's making threats against our officers. He's refusing to cooperate, and we fear for our safety." It was a setup. A complete, calculated setup. The real cop got out of his car, his eyes scanning the scene. Baldy immediately walked over, shaking his hand like they were old buddies. I needed to act fast. Before they could spin the story, I pulled out my own phone and hit record. I walked toward the real officer, keeping my voice calm. "Officer, I need you to understand something. These men are impersonating law enforcement and are attempting to enter my property under false pretenses. They've fabricated a fake warrant and are attempting an illegal compliance inspection. They are trespassing." Baldy stepped in, his voice full of false urgency. "Sir, this individual is refusing a legal HOA compliance check and has been hostile toward our officers. We need assistance ensuring compliance." I turned my phone toward him, zooming in on his badge. "You're not officers. You're private citizens in uniforms trying to intimidate me." The real cop looked between us, obviously trying to figure out what the hell was happening. I made sure to hand in the fake warrant before Baldy could speak again. "Take a look at this. It's not signed by a judge. It's not issued by a court. It's a self-declared piece of paper made by this OA. The cop took it, flipping through the pages. His frown deepened. Then he turned to Baldy. Is this what you call me here for? A fake legal document. Baldy's smug grin vanished. It's an official HOA order. This is not a court-issued warrant. You don't have the authority to detain or force compliance. The HOA goon started shifting uncomfortably. Then the best part happened. The cop folded the fake warrant in half, looked up at Baldy, and said the words I had been dying to hear. If you and your men don't leave this property immediately, I'll be charging you with trespassing and unlawful detainment. Baldy's face went pale. The other HOA enforcers didn't even wait for him to respond. They started backing up toward their SUVs, clearly not wanting to get arrested. I stood there, arms crossed, as they scrambled to leave, not so tough anymore. The cop turned to me and shook his head. Some of these HOA groups are out of control. If they come back, call us. We'll handle it. I nodded, my mind already racing, because I knew something they didn't. They weren't done with me yet. And next time, they weren't just going to try to fake a warrant. They were going to come back, and they were going to try to arrest me for real. I had a feeling they weren't done. People like them never stop when they're embarrassed. They come back angrier. The moment the real police made them leave my property last time, I knew they'd be plotting their next move. I just didn't expect them to go this far. It was 2:17 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of my front gate being forced open. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then came the pounding on my front door. Boom, boom, boom. This is the HOA enforcement unit. Open the door immediately. I shot out of bed. My security cameras had already sent an alert to my phone, and when I pulled up the footage, my blood ran cold. There they were. 8 men dressed in black, full tactical gear, helmets, vests that said, "Oh, police," in bold white letters. They were holding flashlights, and 2 of them had actual riot shields. What the hell? I threw on a pair of pants and a shirt, grabbed my phone, and started recording immediately. As I ran toward the front of my house, I saw something that made my anger explode. They had brought a battering ram. I barely had time to unlock the door before they smashed into it, nearly breaking it off the hinges. I threw the door open and stepped outside, my phone raised high. What the hell do you think you're doing? Baldy was there again, standing at the front of the group, a flashlight aimed at my face. Step outside, sir. You are under investigation for noncompliance and obstruction of HOA authority. I actually laughed. HOA authority? You mean the authority you don't actually have? He ignored me and pulled out another fake document. We have a warrant to conduct an emergency compliance check due to multiple violations. I took the warrant from his hand and held it up to my camera. Oh, look. Another fake legal document signed by the HOA board and not an actual judge. Baldy huffed, his patience wearing thin. Sir, we have reason to believe you are hiding illegal structures and unauthorized modifications on your property. I stared at him. You mean my house? The one I own? The officers spread out, stepping onto my property like they owned the place. That's when I lost it. Every single one of you is trespassing. I want you off my property now. But Baldy wasn't backing down this time. Sir, failure to comply will result in detainment. I stared at him. Detainment? You mean kidnapping. And then it happened. 2 of his guys rushed forward, grabbed my arms, and twisted them behind my back. I was so shocked that for a second, I couldn't even react. Then I felt the plastic zip ties tighten around my wrists. I shouted and struggled, but they were already dragging me down my porch steps. This is illegal. You can't do this. Baldy leaned in close, whispering in my ear. You should have complied. I saw red. But before I could rage any further, a bright spotlight lit up the scene. Red and blue flashing lights filled my driveway. The real cops had arrived, and they did not look happy. The moment the real police officers stepped out of their vehicles, I saw the shift in the HOA goons. They had been so confident walking onto my land, so smug when they put those zip ties on my wrists. But now they look nervous. What's going on here? the real officer demanded, stepping onto my property. Baldy straightened up, trying to put on his best authority figure act. This man was resisting an official compliance inspection, and we were forced to detain him for obstruction. I spoke before he could continue. "Officer, these men are not law enforcement. They broke onto my property in the middle of the night and physically restrained me without cause. This is a crime." The cop's eyes flicked to my hands, still bound. Then he looked at Baldy and his gang, all still dressed in their fake police uniforms. His expression went from confused to furious in seconds. "You put him in restraints?" Baldy nodded, standing firm. "We are within our rights as an enforcement authority to detain non-compliant homeowners until—" The cop cut him off. "You are not law enforcement. You are not an official authority. You just illegally detained a private citizen. That's kidnapping." Baldy's face went ghost white. "Now, let me make this clear," the cop continued. "I'm placing all of you under arrest for unlawful detainment, impersonation of law enforcement, trespassing, and criminal intimidation." The HOA goons started panicking. One of them actually tried to run. He didn't get far. The real police took them all down within seconds. Meanwhile, another officer rushed over and cut the zip ties off my wrists. "You okay?" he asked. I rubbed my wrist, still fuming. "I will be as soon as they're all in handcuffs." And they were. One by one, the entire HOA police squad was marched off my property, now wearing real cuffs instead of the fake ones they had tried to put on me. Baldy glared at me as they shoved him into the back of a police car. "You don't know who you're messing with," he hissed. I grinned. "Neither did you." The aftermath was even better than I could have imagined. 1. Every single HOA officer was charged with multiple crimes, including trespassing, harassment, and unlawful detainment. 2. Baldy faced the worst of it, with additional charges for impersonating law enforcement. 3. The HOA was slapped with a massive lawsuit, and the state attorney's office got involved, investigating all their past enforcement tactics. By the end of it, the HOA was so buried in legal fees and fines that they completely dissolved within 6 months. And me? I was finally free. No more fake cops. No more harassment. Just peace and quiet. And the best part, the new neighborhood association that formed afterward actually came to me for advice on how to run things legally. Talk about poetic justice. For a while, everything was peaceful. Too peaceful. The HOA had been dissolved, the fake cops were facing charges, and my land was finally mine again. But if there's one thing I learned throughout this whole nightmare, it's that people like them never give up. It started with a flyer. One afternoon, I stepped out to check my mailbox and found a brightly colored letter tucked inside with big, bold letters at the top. "The Neighborhood Improvement Association is back." I nearly burst out laughing. It was the HOA. Well, not exactly. They had changed the name, but it was the same group of people who had tried to control me before. The flyer claimed they were forming a new voluntary homeowners group, but the wording was eerily familiar. Community guidelines, aka nonsense rules they tried to enforce. Membership benefits, which were just more ways to collect money. Security patrols, which I assumed was their way of sneaking back into playing fake cops. The best part? The flyer listed a brand new president. Baldy's wife. I chuckled, shaking my head. They just couldn't stay away. 2 days later, I saw them coming. A group of 5 people, walking straight toward my house like they owned the place. Leading the pack, Baldy's wife, a smug grin plastered on her face. I met them halfway up my driveway. "Good afternoon," she chirped, holding out a clipboard. "We'd love to talk to you about the exciting changes happening in the neighborhood." I crossed my arms. "You mean the changes where you try to start another HOA after the last one was sued into the ground?" Her smile twitched, but she kept it together. "Oh no, we're not an HOA. We're just a friendly neighborhood association dedicated to improving the community." I stared at her. "And who exactly voted for you to represent us?" She blinked. "Well, we took the initiative to." So no one did." The other members shifted awkwardly. "Listen," she continued, "all we ask is for a small monthly contribution. I held up a hand. Let me stop you right there. I pulled out a copy of my property deed. This is my land. I own it outright. Your association holds no authority over me, my property, or anyone else's property unless they willingly join. And considering what happened last time, I highly doubt anyone is stupid enough to sign up. She gritted her teeth. I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss us, she said, voice dripping with fake politeness. The neighborhood is changing, and those who refuse to cooperate might find themselves left out. I nodded slowly. Then I pulled out my phone and started recording. Care to repeat that? She blanched. No, that's not. I turned my phone toward her little group. Did anyone else hear her try to intimidate me? The other members took a step back. One of them muttered, "This is exactly why we told you not to come here." I smirked. You know what happened last time. You know how this ends. Leave now and never come back. For a second, she looked like she wanted to argue. But then she turned on her heel and stormed off, her followers scattering behind her. I stood there, watching them go, shaking my head. Some people never learn. The best part? After that little stunt, I went around and talked to my neighbors. Turns out, not a single one of them wanted this new OA. Most of them hadn't even heard about it until I told them. So we decided to end it before it could even start. A week later, a neighborhood-wide petition circulated, officially rejecting any HOA-like organization from forming ever again. And guess what? Almost every single resident signed it. The Neighborhood Improvement Association crumbled before it even got off the ground. Baldy's wife? She moved 2 months later. Apparently, she couldn't stand living in a place where she had no power over anyone. And me? I finally got my peace and quiet. HOA free. Forever.